Hello and welcome to my channel. Hope everybody's safe and well. In this video we're going to be looking at adding totals to rows and columns in pivot tables. Now the first thing I should mention is this is probably not my preferred approach when it comes to working with data. I would much rather output that data to another tool such as Power BI, Excel, or even a front-end application. But I am going to show you in this video how we can add total rows and columns to our pivot tables. As always, we're going to start with creating a table and inserting some data, and this will be available in the description should you wish to follow along. So we're just going to create a simple table with an order ID, customer ID, product ID and amount. So we're just imagining we've got a number of customers, we sell a number of products for an amount. Let's have a look at our starting point. So here I've wrote out a very simple pivot query. So to start with, from our orders table, we're just bringing in the customer ID, the product and the amount. We're pivoting, we're calculating the total amount for each product, and then there's our spreading columns, and then we just have our final select, and then lastly we're ordering by customer ID. Let's execute the query and have a look at the data we're working with. Now the aim of this video is to add a total for customers. So we're going to be ignoring our product, and we want to add a total column for customer spend, and then we're also going to be ignoring our customers and adding a total row for our products at the bottom of our query. So our starting point is our pivot query, and there are really three parts to a pivot query. First, there's the input, which is the derived table. Then there's the pivot operation itself, which is where we're computing the amount and the new columns. And then there's the final select from that pivot query. So the first option we're going to add, and the simplest option, is we can simply add an extra column, which is just adding these column values together. So let's have a look at what that would look like. So if I just simply create a new column, and the key part to this is we're working within the final select. So I'm just going to put these on a single line, just simply adding the plus in between rather than selecting them as columns. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And as you can see already, this approach is probably more work than we want to do. And we'll just give that an alias as, so we're going to be adding those, so that's going to give our customer total. Let's execute the query and have a look at what that looks like. So we've managed to achieve what we were looking for. We were looking to add in a total column here based on the customer's total spend across those products. Now this approach has a key benefit in that we can actually customize and control how that total is computed. So perhaps there's some kind of product we have or something else we're pivoting by that's not actually included in the total. Say for example we didn't actually want printer included in the total, or for some reason we had to customize that total. We actually have full control at this point of what that total is made up of. So that's one thing to consider. But on the flip side of that is it does involve sort of some manual work and making sure that all columns are added correctly. So we have to make sure that if we are looking for that total to include everything, we have to make sure that they are all added together. So that can be quite cumbersome if we're working with a number of new columns. Now my preferred approach, and this generally applies to anything I'm doing within a pivot query, is always to add the data within this derived table. So this is prior to the pivot operation has been performed. This is producing results to perform that pivot operation on. So we're simply going to remove that calculation now, and we're going to change our derived table. Now what we effectively have to do, if we just have a look at the raw data, so we've got our customer ID, our product and an amount. Now we need to add a total to this table based on customer ID. Now we can't simply add a group by because we'd lose the level of detail we're looking for. We can't use a window function because that would add a new column. So effectively we need to build onto this table by adding our own new row. So we're going to add a union all and then select customer ID. Then we're going to create a new column, which is going to, not a new column but a new product effectively, and we're going to call this customer total as the product, and then we're going to go sum amount, and we will just alias that as amount. It's going to be from our orders table, and we're going to group by customer ID. So if we have a look at the underlying derived table now we've built, we'll see there's been some additional rows added, and we now have a new product of customer total that will exist once per customer, showing the total amount of customer spent. Now there is two gotchas with this approach. First is to do with data types that we'll have a look at shortly. So of course if I'm adding a string of customer total, luckily I'm adding that to an existing string data type, but we might have to do some manipulation. In fact, when we add in the total row to the pivot query, we'll see that how we handle that. The other is rounding. So when we're applying any rounding and performing aggregations, we need to make sure we do it in a consistent way to get the same results. I'll probably talk more about that in another video. Once we have our derived table built, we can then go and add that to our pivot query as if it were a different value for product. So within our pivot query we're going to add the customer total, and then again within our final select we're also going to add our customer total. So let's just hide the results grid and we'll just go through that now. So we've built on additional rows to our derived table, this time aggregating by customer ID. We'll just give this an alias as product just to be crystal clear. So we've actually effectively just created a value for product here, and it's just simply a group by customer ID to compute the sum of the amount. Once we've done that, we can then add that as a product and then add it to the final select, execute the query, and we can see we're getting the same results. So we've managed to add in a customer total. So that's a way of adding in a column for totals. But how about if we also wanted to build in a row for totals? So for each product, ignoring customer, we want a row at the bottom to show the total for monitors, laptops, PCs, etc. So how would we go about that? And it's really going to be a similar approach. Again, we're going to build on our derived table, adding rows by union into another calculation, and this time we're going to group by product rather than customer ID. So I'm just going to set -1 as customer ID for now, and we'll come back and apply some manipulation to that. So this is where the data type problem will come in. So product would be itself, because we're looking to group by product, and then again some amount, that's going to be from our orders table. And we can probably see one of the other downsides to this approach, and we're going to be grouping by product, is that we do hit the orders table multiple times within building this query. So if I execute that query, if we scroll down to the bottom, we should see additional rows added with a customer ID, and we'll see some large amounts for product sales. Now, because we've added those as a new customer ID, which is effectively going to be the rows in our result, there is nothing we need to do within the pivot query or the final select, because customer ID already exists in both. If I execute that query and we have a look at the results, because we've set the customer ID to -1 and it's an integer value, it's going to standard order at the top, most probably. In fact, it will do, because yeah, we do have an explicit order by on the query. So we can see that that's actually at the top, showing the total for products. So we could leave it at that, but customer ID of -1 is perhaps not clear. So how about if we was to change that to, in this case it's going to be product total. Just hide the results. So I've simply just changed that -1 to product total. If I execute that, I will get the error to say that SQL Server Engine cannot convert product total to a data type int. So this is what I was referring to earlier about the data type gotcha. So how we're going to have to display these results is simply convert the customer ID to a string. So I'm just going to go and add in some cast to varchar 20 just for simplicity. The final query will be available within the description as well. If I execute that now, just alias both of those as customer ID. And if I execute that now and scroll down to the bottom, we can see we've actually got our product total at the bottom. But in converting that to a string, so all numbers are now strings, we end up with a non-numeric sort of sort. So 1 first, 10, then 100, then 1000, then 101. So that's not ideal, and we can customize that sort order. So first we're going to order by the length of customer ID. So that would allow 2 to go before 10, and then once we've done that, we'll order by customer ID. And if I execute that, we can see our ordering issue's been resolved. We've added our customer total row, and then we've also added in our product total row at the bottom. So as you can see, this is not easy to do. We do need to apply some, I would say, perhaps unnatural manipulation to the data, whereas if we took the result of a pivot and dropped it into a tool like Excel or a client application or Power BI, we could even perform the pivot operation. or even just use a matrix visual, then it would be what seems to me is a lot more natural than using a client tool like SQL Server Management Studio. But it can be done, and it's definitely worth playing around with, and then it's up to you what you would like to do with that data. This can simply be saved and sent on to users, or actually the result produced for a front-end application to display the results. Really hope you have enjoyed that video. Like I say, the finished query will be available in the description.